Everyone, or good evening or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Dachihan Miller here from Warrior Concepts, and we're here with another Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday, right? So this episode is kind of different than most. I'm still going to cover tactics, strategies, those kind of things, but this is actually springboarding off of this week's Kuden radio podcast, right, for my martial artists and self-defense guys and things like that, right, where we covered this idea of whether or not martial arts kata work for self-defense, right? There's this huge debate in the martial arts. I'm not gonna, recap all that kind of stuff. If you're interested, we've got a link to the Kuden playlist and whatnot, or you can go to the channel and just, if you're on YouTube, go to the channel and click on the live button. Should be, besides this one, it should be the next one in line, unless you're watching this, I don't know, 5 years from now. Anyway, but the idea comes from folks that supposedly have a lot of fight experience. And so what they tend to say is, that shit don't work on the street, right? Kata don't work on the street, okay? So what we're actually going to do is take a look at both sides, right, very quickly, but get really, really clear about why these things are there, right? But before we do that, we need to take a look at two types of kata, right? Because when a lot of people, that's going to be too thin. When people tend to think about martial arts kata, what they tend to think about, right? So there's two types, right? Okay. There's two types. The first one that most people think of are these strings of skills, right? But they're done solo. Okay. So it's one person, right, doing their thing. For beginners might be 2, 3, 4 moves, and then you're going to repeat it in multiple directions, that kind of thing. And then the higher in rank you go, the more long and drawn out these things get. I've seen or heard about kata that are up in the 40s, like number of movements and things like that. So I have to question myself whether or not that's more of an exercise in memorization and rote repetition than it is about self-defense and all that. And there's a whole historical reason why these things were developed and all that. I've discussed this in past Kuden episodes. I've discussed it off and on here again on different Whiteboard Wednesdays. Not for today, right? The second type, and these are written with different kanji, right? Not always, but usually, okay? The second one looks more like a fight scenario, right? Or what in a lot of martial arts schools looks like their self-defense portion, or like 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step, whatever. Kata, where he throws something, I do something, whatever, that kind of thing, right? So this, right, with rare exceptions, is done with at least one other partner, right? So while both of the kanji and the word kata can be translated to mean form, right? There's other translations. Again, fight scenario, situation, example, model, those kind of things, right? So what we're going to take a look at today are these, okay? So what we're really looking at for all the naysayers is a snapshot in time, okay? And I've got a list of, 8 of these things, reasons and what you're doing with kata as you're training, right? So, but let's start with appeasing them and talk about what kata is not. All right. Okay. So, again, let's take a look at 3 things, right? Kata are not. Okay. So first one, right? A kata is not the fight, right? So my goal for this episode, for this training, is not just to help put things back into context as to why kata exist and how they can be used to improve our skill proficiency when it comes to self-defense. But we also need to make sure that, especially for a lot of the beginners or people that are just jumping into this thing, right, and actually believing that that's how you're going to fight, we need to make sure we handle that as well, okay? So could you do something that is really, really close, or it might even coincidentally be spot on with a simple 2, maybe 3 step thing that you've learned or whatever. Yeah, of course, right? There's always that possibility, right? But no matter what we do, okay, the kata is not the fight, okay? The kata was a form or an example that past masters put together. Now, when I say past masters, right, let me clarify that as well, okay? Because a lot of people operate, not that this isn't true with the 20th and 21st century, where a bunch of jackwagons ran around throwing shit together and calling it their own style because they had this deep-seated egoistic need to be relevant in their own life because they don't see their own value, and they had to create a martial art where they would be the grand master. Okay, those jackwagons aside, I almost use a different terminology that might be getting me booted off some of these places, right? Okay, those aside, okay. When I say past masters, I'm talking about combat veterans in their own right, in their own time. And what they did was they came up with ways to depict a snapshot in time, a potential based on a certain setup where you could catch things, neutralize, and lead things in a given direction, right? It's a possibility, right? But it's a teaching example. It's a teaching model. Okay. I gave this example the other day when I said, back in the day when I was in high school, I was studying the Spanish language, right? And one of the first sentences I learned was, mi lápiz es amarillo. Okay. My pencil is yellow. When am I ever going to need to use the sentence, my pencil is yellow? Like somebody's going to walk up, see my pencil, unless they don't know colors or they're colorblind, right? Chances are they're going to see that it's a pencil, not a pen, not a marker, not a crayon, whatever. And they're going to see that it's freaking yellow of some shade, right? So when the hell am I ever going to need to use my pencil is yellow? It's not about the sentence. It's about giving me a form that I can learn fairly quickly that has a subject, a verb, and an adjective in it, a descriptor word. It's a model sentence that I can then learn other vocabulary and do word substitution on my way to fluency with being able to communicate with other people. So if I start off with, mi lápiz es amarillo, my pencil is yellow, I can then start substituting things out, right? I can then learn to say, my hair is brown, right? My eyes are blue, my shirt is red, those kind of things, right? I can then substitute out my or me, right? And go, his hair is black, her hair, you get the idea, right? It's a freaking model. But let's get this off the table. The kata is not the fight any more than the dojo or whatever training area you have, right? Is not the fight environment where the attack or the assault will take place. But most people try to find the most comfortable area, and they never start to move obstacles in or move into areas like between parked cars and crap like that, where you might actually have to operate, right? It's more likely that you're going to operate in and around trip hazards, walls, other people, right? Divots in the ground, all kinds of shit, right? Than you are in a big old wide open sanitary space. But it's the same thing for kata. Kata is not the fight, okay? Second thing a kata is not, hey, my shit stops working, right? So second thing a kata is not, right? It's not just moves. I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you see that? Let me change things out. How about that? Okay, not just moves. Okay, a kata, you'll see in a minute when I start talking about what it is, right? Somebody, and again, these jackwagons aside, who just decide they're going to make up their own freaking martial art, or in the case of that solo kata kind of form, right? My historical study has kind of pointed to that was a way for somebody to string skills together in a logical format to stay proficient with them between battles. right? Got a battle. I survived that one. I need to keep my skills up to over here, but I'm going to go home and visit family. I'm going to go wandering in the frickin' woods or the mountains to decompress, whatever, right? So it's a way to kind of keep the individual skills proficient and make sure that I have a logical flow. I can move from one skill to another skill to another skill, right? But it's not interacting with another person. That's why in a lot of those martial arts, you have this concept of bunke, right? The translating the kata for the real world kind of thing, right? In the second thing, the one we're dealing with here, there is no translation. You have somebody throwing a freaking punch or a kick or a grab or a sword or whatever at you, okay? So we're not talking about just move strung together, right? There is a tactical, logical reason, right, for these things to be the way they are. Again, focused on potentials, focused on outcomes, there's a whole bunch of things, right? Okay. The third one is that the kata is not the point of the lesson. Right? Now I know when we're a beginner, right? Teacher teaches something, right? Well, but that is the lesson, right? He wants me to learn this thing. Yeah, why? Okay, so, right, you learned the alphabet. In whatever language you speak, you learned the alphabet. You learned how to write the letters so you could do what? Put them together to form words. To do what? To string them together to create sentences. Why? To communicate ideas from person to person, okay? And the better you got at that, then you were able to create paragraphs, you were able to create stories, book reports, all kinds of things, right? So we learn it so we can learn what it brings to the table, okay? Most people stop at learning the kata, and then they make up a bunch of other shit, okay? I want you to think of the kata as like a delivery truck. We talk about this a lot in this past week's Kuden, but I want you to think about it like a delivery truck, right? You go to a furniture store, you buy furniture for your living room, right? They plan a delivery day, they pack it up on a truck, and they do what? They drive it to your house. The stuff gets unloaded, right? So there's a whole process for unloading it, whole process for getting it in your house, and then you decide how it's going to functionally serve you in the way you set it up because of your lifestyle and all that kind of stuff, right? Fights are not like that, right? We're going to be setting things up and putting things in place and making sure they're appropriate based on what we know about the way fights happen, the way certain types of attacker types do their thing, environments we could be in, all that, right? But either way, here's the thing, right? But to think that the kata is the fight is to believe that the delivery truck is going to bring the furniture, not just to your house, they're going to drive it in the front door, park it in your living room, and then for the rest of your life, you're going to be climbing up and down out of the truck to sit on the couch. That's not the way it works, okay? So we need to understand how this thing is, right? So three things kata are not. They're not the fight, right? They're an example, a model of a potential, a possibility, a snapshot in time, okay? They're not just moves, right? They're a physical reflection of tactics, strategies, principles, and concepts in physical action, right? And they're not the lesson, okay? You learn it so you can start learning the lessons that are embedded in the kata, okay? So moving on, right? I know I had a little note here that I injected in between these two things. Okay. Yeah. And I think I did a Whiteboard Wednesday on this a while back. So you're gonna have to research it on the YouTube channel or whatever. But we did this thing, and I teach it often at seminars. I created this format that I call 0 point. Right. It's a 0 point framework. Okay. And very quickly, just for those of you who might not have ever seen it. Right. Okay. So we're gonna do this and put a 0 right here. We have a. I'll try to make sure that James, my guy that runs my online stuff, I'll make sure that he puts a link in the description, at least on YouTube. We'll try to get to the Facebook pages as well, where you can go and actually download the worksheet that this scribble represents. Okay, so. Okay, so what exactly is 0 point, right? Again, very, very quickly, okay? So 0 point is, most people, when they look at the kata, right, even those who get it, that it's not the fight, it's a model for self-defense, they don't really know how to kind of approach it to make sure that that thing can become street ready, right? Or bits and pieces of it can become street ready, right? So the idea very, very quickly behind the 0 point is whatever the kata is, okay? For my Nijutsu Bujinkan people, right? We're going to put Ichimonji no kata right here, okay? It's one of the foundational forms or examples, right? Ichimonji no kata. It's an example for how to use Ichimonji no kamae. That's what this points to, right? But either way, the reason it's on the 0 point is because all of this stuff down here, these are all the things that I have to learn and get proficient with so I can do the kata correctly. Okay? But this is where 99.2% of people stop. I don't know what the freaking exact number is, but you get the idea, right? The masses stop right here because the goal was mastering the kata. And that's fine if you're just trying to learn a martial art, right? If you're trying to learn how to not die on the street, that can't be the end point. That's the beginning point. We got to do all this shit just to get this right. So now we can start doing all of these things. Plus 10 right here is street ready, which means there's lots of things that are in here. Here, this is footwork, kamae, the posture, receiving or counter striking, how to make a certain fist, how the arm moves to deliver that, all those things, right? How to move properly, how to maintain distance, and how to enter in without them being, punching you in the throat while you're trying to deliver your thing, right? Right? All the shit you see in like sluggo fights, okay? And then all this stuff up here, right? This is like practicing to do it again in between parked cars, or in your house where there's a coffee table behind you, or walls, or whatever, right? Uneven ground, doing it against a hook punch or an uppercut or a back fist or a roundhouse kick or whatever, instead of the thing that this was based off of, right? Again, just real simple, right? But again, there's got to be a whole process to get from point A to point B, okay? And it's not just that your training format or your training process has to be right, okay? The way it's given to you, the way it's taught, the things, you don't just, and again, you can do whatever you want. Your teacher can do whatever he wants, right? And then the consequences that you get are a natural byproduct of that, right? Okay? So you're not just trusting your teacher to teach you moves. You should be trusting your teacher to teach you how to think about conflict, how to handle and control a situation, right? There's all kinds of things that are going on there. How to learn things in a certain order, not because it's the official traditional way to do it, but because each thing builds on the next, not kata based, but based on the end result, right? I'm pointing out the windows of my dojo here, right? Because the street is the only thing that matters, right? If I ask people, what's the only test that matters, right? What's the most important test you ever take? People will go, like for my first belt, because that means I got started. Most people will say my black belt, whatever. No, the most important test, if you're focused on self-defense, right, is the one you're going to take when Joe Cool Jackwagon decides he's going to beat, break, or kill you. And you either put up or shut up, okay? It's still no guarantee you're going to live, because, one of his friends can conk you in the head afterwards or from behind, right? Anyway, okay, so let's, again, jump ahead, right? I'm steamrolling through this stuff, right? So 8, what do I have down here, right? So 8 things, right, that, and this is not correct English, coming from an English major, right? 8 things that kata are, okay? Are there more than 8? Yeah. If we have enough time and you stick around, I'll give you 2 bonus ones at the end. Okay. So first thing, right? First thing that a kata is an example. I'm going to use this word a lot, right? Is an example of logical flow. Okay. It's teaching good options, good positioning, good angling, how to string things together based on what he's doing. Okay. I let him lead the dance. Okay. again, we don't have time to jump into all these things, right? If you have the wherewithal, right, there's a link right there for the Friday virtual training. We're going to take a look at this and a couple other things that we're going to talk about in just a couple of examples this Friday during that training, because we're going to reverse engineer Kata to understand deeper lessons that are in there and why the Kata says that this next thing is the next thing, and how to know whether your technique's right or wrong. Like if you have to keep doing what people call henka, right, or variations, or you have to keep abandoning what you were trying to do for something else, right, or whatever, then it's not the kata, okay? It's not the form, it's not the example, right? It's timing, distancing, angling, footwork, whatever, right? Okay, so we'll talk about this as we go along as well, okay? So it's an example of logical flow. It's also an example, right? Excuse me, of strategic and tactical control, right? Of strategic and tactical control. I do what I do, not just to catch him, right? Physically, like applying on a shoulder dislocation or whatever. I do what I do because it causes him to do certain things, okay? It's a cause and effect. We cannot, as human beings in this realm, right? We cannot escape cause and effect. And yet most human beings do what they do, gravitate to belief systems that they gravitate to, and in just about every area of their life where they don't like the way things are going, instead of figuring out what natural laws are and understanding cause and effect, what the shit that they do that's causing that, and all this kind of stuff, right? It's just easier to blame or wish across some candles and hope that when we blow them out, cause and effect will go to the wind and the universe will suddenly shift on its axis and give us what we want, regardless of what it does to anybody else, okay? And people do that in the martial arts, right? So it's an example of strategic and tactical control, right? Again, we have to learn the model so we can dive in and start looking at, okay? Because if I'm practicing any given kata, let's say I'm practicing Tangeki from the Koto Ryu Shoden no Maki, right? I can practice it to learn it to make sure I have my moves. And then I can look at it and go, okay, logical flow, okay? What is this telling me? Because this was one way that the past masters, remember those combat vets I talked about, convey strategic thinking about handling violence coming at you and how to shut down another human body as quickly, effectively, and as efficiently as possible. Okay? Again, ignoring all the jackwagons that made shit up. I'm talking about the original guys back in the day, right? The whole dojo concept came about because these warriors ran out of war, right? Well, now how do they support their family? They have no other saleable skills, so they open up a dojo, okay? And no, they didn't give their freaking lessons away, contrary to popular belief, okay? They sold their lessons to people who had a shit ton of money who could pay them enough to support themselves, their family, keep the dojo open, all that kind of stuff, okay? Well, it shouldn't be that way. I don't give a shit what it should be, okay? You go work for free. See, that's different, right? Okay? Anyway, what else is it, right? It's an example, here's that fucking example again, right? Of potential outcome. Okay? In the beginning, I understand that if I apply this thing, I put him down over here. If I apply a different one, I put him down at a different angle, right? In the upper levels, as I get better, it's kind of like playing pool. I should be able to call my shots, okay? Not because I'm thinking ahead, but because I understand the environment I'm in. If I'm between two parked cars, right, I have to consider these vehicles that are next to me, that are straddling us, okay? So if I try to do a throw where I've got one arm, but he can just stick his arm out against a car and jam it up and then resist against things and the fight changes direction, right? That's a problem. So I might need to make sure that when I throw, I shift so I dump him between these two cars. Or I can use the cars. I can throw him in a way that his head or some body part bounces off this car, and that car becomes what we like to politically correctly call usable aids on hand or on head or whatever the hell I knocked him off of, right? Okay, so again, we're going to cover a bunch of this stuff during the Friday virtual training, right? So anyway, all right, let's keep on going, right? Okay, number 4, okay? It is an expert role model. We talked about this before. Okay. A lot of people dismiss this stuff. And I think a lot of model. Okay. I think a lot of people, Joe Rogan and who's the former Navy SEAL that does podcasts and stuff like that. Really, really tough guys, right? And they're fighters. Okay. They dismiss a lot of these things. And I believe that they dismiss them because of what they've seen or what they've experienced. Okay. So, and again, if you dismiss it, then you have what's known as confirmation bias, where you're going to make the assumption and then you're going to steer away from it, because as soon as you decide whether something's good, bad, pleasant, unpleasant, useful, not useful, or whatever, it taints every decision from that point on in that realm, and sometimes connecting realms. Right. So, but an expert role model. Okay. So when people come to the training, they want to be an expert. They want to be a master. Call it whatever you want. Right. Guru, Shifu, whatever. Right. Okay. This is the goal. Okay. So these things were put together by those kind of people, right? Combat experts and all that kind of stuff, right? So if I want to be an expert, then I want to learn this, right? And I don't know about anybody else's systems or whatever, but the stuff that we're teaching was developed and refined over a period between 1,000 and 2,000 years long. That's combat experts passing things on to the next generation that continue to work. How do I know they continue to work? Because the shit that didn't work died on the battlefield or a back alley. Okay. But they studied, if you ever watched the movie The Last Samurai, right? One of the things that came up in the movie was, you're talking about these guys that are going to take on guns with swords. Yeah. You don't need to be worried about them. Yeah. Guys with swords and spears who've been studying warfare for 1,000 years. Okay. That's not somebody who dabbles. That's not somebody with a hobby who goes to class twice a week. Right? That's somebody who lives and dies by. Okay. So it's an expert role model. If I want to be an expert, then before I diss things, or before I shut it down or say it doesn't work or whatever, I might want to take a look at it and try to understand why it came about that way. Okay. And before I get fixated on it, I need to understand it. I have to understand it so I can translate it to 21st century America or Australia or Macau or India, whatever. My students are all over the place, right? Okay. So that's 4, right? Okay. Number 5. Okay. They're bad habit breakers. That's a K, right? Bad habit breakers. What that means is if I can't do the kata, it's not the kata. It's me. People like to change shit up because, well, that's not me. I don't give a shit. Okay. If you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't be in a martial arts school learning stuff. Right. Or if you didn't feel like there were gaps in what you already know, you wouldn't be going after. And if you are, then it's just to feed ego. I had a guy one time, super, super skilled at Taekwondo, right? Wanted to jump into ninjutsu. Got uber pissed off one day when I kept pressing. Why? Why ninjutsu? You can already defend your wife. You can already protect yourself. You're already very, very, very skilled. Why ninjutsu? I knew why. Because it was a stroke to his ego. Okay. But he wouldn't admit that. Instead, he got pissed off, which is usually a sign that ego doesn't like where things are going. Okay. So anyway, we got more. All right. Probably shouldn't erase the top, but hey, all right. Just make some space here. Okay. So continuing on with the 8 things of what they are, right? We hit number 5. So number 6. Switch my notes out here so I don't get lost. Okay. All right. Number 6. Kata are a place to start. They're not the whole thing. They're not the whole lesson. Okay. My teacher, Hatsumi Sensei, from the Bujinkan, there's this meme circulating around the internet that comes from one snippet of one such lesson like this, right? Where he talked about people's misunderstanding about kata. So kata is not the lesson. Kata is not the end point, right? Kata only indicate where you need to start. And then you move out from there, right? We've got this whole other process that I did at least one Whiteboard Wednesday on called the Kyonapo process, not Kyonapan 8 techniques. Kyonapo, there's a process. I take any given kata, right? And I make 8 variations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 variations of each of that kata, right? I make 8 variations, and then I make 8 variations of each of those, and then I make 8 right? But I also need to make sure I can do my kata in any one of 8 directions, right? So I can, because most people train like the bad guy is always going to be in front of them. What if they're blindside and it comes in from their peripheral vision and they need to move off at that naname angle or whatever, but the attack's coming in from over here, or it's a hook punch, or it's an upward slamming diagonal, or it's a clubbing attack with a frickin' pipe and it's coming down at a downward diagonal, right? How do I neutralize that thing? Okay. So they're a place to start, right? And again, it's harder to see this in the Koryu era schools, right? Koryu means old school, right? There's used to be this argument online about whether or not the Bujinkan arts were old school or not, right? And Bujinkan people would argue, oh, yes, they are. They're this old. No, you don't understand, okay? The historians are right, okay? These schools, especially Togakure, right? Our oldest ninja school is not a Koryu. It's not an old school, okay? Stop trying to translate a foreign concept with a Western definition, or worse yet, an assumption, all right? Because that's what ends up happening. You make an ass out of yourself, okay? There was a certain period in Japanese history, there was a certain era that if the school was founded between here and here, it was given a designation as a Koryu. And during that period, there was kind of a standardization. There was some variation, but there was a standardization as to how the scrolls were laid out, naming. There are all these conventions, right? So schools within this time period had this thing going on, and that's why they have this designation. The Togakure school in the Bujinkan and several other lineages are too old to be old schools. They're too old to be Koryu, okay? But the Togakure school really plays around with this thing, right? Because there's multiple areas of study, but each area might only have 3 or 5 or whatever examples, right? And that's what they were, okay? But that's not all there is. It was a place to get you started, and then you were supposed to take the principles and concepts and explore and expand and build it. So, right? But again, misunderstanding or trying to do an art like ninjutsu, like most people have learned a very rigid Koryu, right? A very rigid martial art where you don't change anything, right? The kata is the kata. You get one piece out of position, even if you had to adapt to something to recover. It's wrong, okay? So kata are a place to start, right? 7, right? Kata are a delivery vehicle. They're delivery vehicles for the lessons. Right? Just like I talked about with the delivery truck earlier, okay? It's not the lesson. It's the thing you learn so that you can learn the lessons that are embedded in it, okay? So the question, once you learn the kata is, what's this teaching me? Just like when you learn a kamae, right? I learn a posture, right? Right? What is the kamae teaching me? Most people stop at, well, it's something I have to learn. What do you mean, what's it teaching me? Right? What does punching teach you? Principles and principle concept based, right? It's teaching you limb extension and retraction based on the way the body works. Okay, unless you're just caveman, just flailing, right? And then you're not in the realm of science anyway. You're just in the realm of I got heart and I want you dead, and that's all that matters. Okay, there's something to be said for that. But if that's the thing, then why bother to learn a martial science, right? A science of warfare, of conflict resolution. Okay. All right. Number 8. Okay. I mentioned this before. It is a snapshot in time. Nothing makes me laugh more than when these jagwagons, I've got all these freaking YouTube shorts out and all that kind of stuff, right? And somebody makes this assumption that they can look at a couple of seconds of a blip of a lesson or not, it's just a demonstration of something, and say that won't work, that can't work, you're an idiot, right? Whatever, right? But it's a snapshot in time. Combine that with some of the other things, it's a potential, it's a possibility, whatever. It depends on a whole shit ton of other variables, right? it's just a snapshot, right? But what time, right? Because again, most people look at kata as though they're the whole thing. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this snapshot in time could be the beginning of the fight, it could be the middle of the fight, or it could be the end of the fight. Most people, I get it, right? They focus on the ideal. He throws a punch, I wipe the floor with his ass, and I walk away. Okay? Wouldn't that be wonderful? If you've ever been in fights, rot's a rot, right? So it could be the beginning. And see, because of the expense of paper was handmade, right? You made your own frickin' ink, right? It was a lot of work, okay? So all this stuff is paraphrased. It's reminders, it's crib notes, whatever you want to call it, right? Cliff notes, okay? But there is an implication that if what you did doesn't work, the fight goes on and something will come next. Do you train that way? Do you train that you might need something else at the end of the kata, okay? We'll string multiple kata together as the transition from point to point, right? It could be the middle of the fight, which means there's an implication that something came before it and you caught a moment and you're trying to lead it to an end, right? Or, and there's the implication that if that didn't work out, there's going to be something else, okay? Or it's the end of the fight. A whole bunch of shit came before it, you caught something, and that's how you ended the fight, okay? It's too much for a new person. So we introduce people with the model, right, as a snapshot in time. Get good at this piece. We'll give you another one later. Get good at this piece. Get good at this piece, right? And hopefully you have enough dots going on that you can transition, you can move, right? Just like when you first learn to drive, okay? They might have put you in a parking lot, right? Do this, right? Do this, do that. You're doing these little things in a bubble, right? Put you out in the street the first time, right? There's more things going on because there's other vehicles, there's freaking people walking the dog, there's all kinds of shit, right? Eventually you hit a point with being a driver where you're no longer driving a car. You're like, it's just you in the car, right? There's just this experience. And you've had so many experiences that you don't wig out at 99.9 of them, right? You just adjust and you might flip somebody off or whatever, right? But it's not the same, right? It's the same thing that goes on with this. We have to have enough, and we have to have enough experience and exchange that kind of thing happens. All right. I have a couple extra minutes, so let's throw two more bonuses in here, right? Two more bonus things that kata are, right? So first one is that kata are an example of a lineage, a school. Well, you know what, we'll call it, just say school, right? Of a school's, how do I describe this? It's an example of a school's approach, okay? Or secrets, okay? There are no secrets, but you get the idea, right? So when I say school, I don't mean my martial arts school as opposed to Kim's Taekwondo. We don't have a Kim's Taekwondo. It's just my catch-all, right? I'm talking about these ancient ryuha, these ancient lineages, okay? Here's the thing. If everybody fights the same way, you have no advantage. So instead of focusing on style, what's their style? That's different than our style. No. What does their approach, you can call it whatever you want, what does their approach give them as an advantage so long as they're going up against somebody who doesn't fight that way, right? What advantage does it give them, okay? And that's what these secrets are, right? It's a couple of well-hidden kind of things that gives them an advantage. Everybody likes to go around showing stuff, and that's one of the downsides to competitions, right? If you got 50 schools, 300 guys at a competition, girls, guys, whatever, right? And everybody's watching everybody else's stuff, pretty soon, nobody has an advantage. And you can see that because in a lot of martial arts demonstrations and competitions, right? With the exception of the uniform and the stances, everybody looks like they're doing the same thing. Every once in a while, something weird comes out. But it's because everybody keeps borrowing, right? And that's what ends up happening, okay? So kata from any given school is an example of that school's strategic approach to handling things, which should be different than what the guy they're facing is used to, right? We need to be fighting in a way that causes him to have to make up his response in the moment, on the fly, with no information to go on because he's never seen it before. Okay? If not, you don't have an advantage. If not, you're forced to fight faster, harder, stronger, which is all great as long as you're a 20-something cocky asshole who thinks he knows everything. But as soon as you turn into a 60-year-old guy who's got a whole lot of mileage and wear and tear on the body, if you're not fighting smarter, not harder, then what you do is you crawl into a damn corner and maybe you pack a gun or whatever, or you shut your damn mouth because your day's over. Right? The trick is, can I learn things in a way that as I get older, nothing changes? I'm not jumping around like a 20-year-old because I don't have to. My teacher, the Grandmaster, has always said, if you're in your 20s, train like you're in your 20s. If you're in your 30s, train like you're in your 30s. 50s, train like you're in your 50s. 70s, train like you're, okay? Stop trying to be a 70-year-old, training like you're in 20s, right? And don't listen to the 20-year-olds who think they're cocksure about everything, who can eat a bullet from across the street. So it doesn't matter how many fights they've been in, how tough they are, right? They're walking around with a big-ass ego that's going to die along with them. And that's just universal justice. So I don't get into pissing contests with these people. Okay? I just smile and nod. Right? Okay? Underestimate me. Right? That'll be fun. Anyway. Okay, number 10. Okay? It is an ideal. Kata is an ideal, right? Wouldn't it be great if the fight started and ended that way, right? He throws a punch, zip, bang, and he's down on the ground. Okay? Wouldn't that be great? Okay? It is the ideal because there's some science behind that. Now, back in the day, they didn't write this shit out in the scrolls because they didn't have modern science and studies to back it up. Okay? But there's a sugar that gets stored in your muscles called glycogen, right? It's what allows you to go through quick bursts of things, right? I don't care if you're wrestling with somebody, you're running, jogging, and all of a sudden you do wind sprints, that kind of thing, right? And you can go all out hell bent for 7 to 11 seconds until the glycogen burns off, and then your body has to try to dip into the fat stores and all that, but that can take long and way longer, right? So what ends up happening is you go through these hills and troughs, okay? So when you go all hell bent out, right, you got to have things over in that 7 to 11 second window, or your body goes into a resting state. Now, you can still hold on to somebody, but that's usually what happens. You'll see, watch an MMA match, you watch Greco-Roman wrestling, whatever. These guys are like on each other, and then all of a sudden they'll like lock up, and there's not a whole lot going on, and then they go into action again, right? And that's what's happening is both people are trying to do shit at the same time. So they're matching each person's spike with their opponent's spike. Okay? The science is you match your spike to his trough. When he's in a resting state, you beat the shit out of him. Okay? But if you're fighting equal with him, you both go into a resting state at the same time. You have to hope that you recover quicker than he does. Okay? But if you're both doing this, it's still even. You don't have an advantage. When you do this, everything changes, right? But it's an ideal. And the ideal, especially if you're not looking at these long, drawn-out kata, right? The kata in our lineages, we're looking at what? 3, 4 moves. Sometimes there might be 5 or 6 if something had to reset, right? Because you kick the guy away from you, and then he comes back in with something else, and then there's like a move or 3 to finish it, right? Okay. So it's very, very short because what we're looking at based on that glycogen thing, again, they didn't know anything about glycogen. I mean, they called the body parts different things, right? Right. But what we need to do is we need to keep this exchange within 2 to 10 seconds. 4 moves or less, 10 seconds or less, or you run the potential of losing at an exponentially faster rate. Okay. One of the rules of survival is energy conservation. So the kata are teaching you how to strategically and tactically handle a situation and not just throw a bunch of shit at the wall. Okay. Anyway, that's what I have. Again, we're going to do some physical examples of these things and reverse engineer some kata on during our Friday virtual class so people can start to understand the lessons within the lessons, right? So that we can get more out of it, right? So it's the kata is not the point, okay? The kata is not the point. There's another thing, like here's an extra bonus on top of the bonuses, right? Number 11, right? How do I write this out? Okay. A kata is a structured, we'll just call it structure, right? Okay. It's a structure, right? It's something I can duplicate again and again and again, right? So if I have a mistake I'm trying to fix, it's going to happen every time I get to the same point in the kata, right? If I'm just doing sluggo, right, and mixed martial arts, whatever, okay, I have to hope that in the moment where I normally make that mistake, I recognize that it's happening. I'm in the moment to recognize it, and I'm not so overstressed that I can't pull the new answer up and try to apply that. Okay. But a kata gives me a structure where if I'm making a mistake, I'm going to make that same mistake every time I get to that same point in a kata. So it allows me to fix my mistakes faster. Okay. It's a redundancy mechanism that allows me to recreate the same problem so I can fix the problem. Right? I know when it's going to happen. I know how it's going to happen so I can fix it. Okay. And by fixing that problem in that technique, that should globally fix the same problem in every technique I ever do. Okay. Whether it's sparring or it's actual kata, it shouldn't matter. Okay. So anyway, we're going to be working on this stuff. Take a look at it, right? Again, you click on that, go to the page. It's $4.99 for a 70 to 90 minute class. You get the recording, whether you can make it or not, right? So even if you can't make it, work schedule, whatever, you can make it. Below the big black buttons that are on that page, there's a blue link that you can actually join other students in what we call our Ninpo Masterclass, which those people get 2 classes per week. They get our Tuesday class and our Friday class. And so you're getting what, 8 or 9 classes a month. Plus there's like $1,300 in bonus programs and all that. But I'm not here to sell that kind of thing, right? You either want to do it or you don't want to do it, or I've given you enough that you now have 11 ways to look at kata for the development of self-defense skill proficiency that has nothing to do with the kata themselves, but what the kata can do for you if you choose to dive into any one of these things and spend some time there. Okay. But again, as always, choice is yours, right? As for me, that's all I have for today. I've got other things I need to get to. So I will talk to you next week on Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Talk to you soon. Train hard.